Hello and welcome to the State of Shakespeare. I'm Garrett Vandermeer. Jim Elliott is away today. Today in the studio we have Jack Cutmore-Scott joining us. Hello, Jack.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being with us. Jack Cutmore-Scott is an accomplished British actor who has starred in the ABC series Deception and in the feature films such as Dunkirk and others. Jack has an impressive list of Broadway credits that include Cyrano de Bergerac and Arcadia, among others, and he has starred as Claudio in Much Ado About Nothing at Shakespeare in the Park in 2014 for director Jack O'Brien. Welcome, Jack.
Thank you.
I saw that production of Much Ado in the Park. So much has happened since 2014 in the world, and Claudio is a difficult guy to love.
He really is, yeah.
Even more difficult in today's climate. What was that experience like?
I mean, it was a wonderful experience, obviously. Getting to do Shakespeare in Central Park is pretty much top of my list and has been for a while. So that was very cool. And obviously Jack O'Brien is an institution in his own right. So the whole experience was pretty great. Claudio himself is, as you say, he's a difficult one. I took the approach that he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, and he has a good heart, but it's just easy to manipulate and frequently pointed in the wrong direction, which I think that was sort of how I justified an awful lot of what he was doing. A cloud of confusion more than anything else.
It makes a lot of sense, and I think when it's done well, as certainly you did, it's easier to forgive Claudio for his actions than it is to forgive Shakespeare for sort of insisting that we do so.
At different times, I think, yeah.
We're always viewing Shakespeare through the lens of the times that we're in. And that's a great segue to this recent project of yours, Hamlet 360, Thy Father's Spirit, which was featured in a recent New York Times article called Hamlet in Virtual Reality Casts the Viewer in the Play. Can you tell us about that project?
Absolutely, yeah. It was Steve Mailer, who is the artistic director of Commonwealth Shakespeare up in Boston. He approached me about it because he had a pre-existing relationship with Google and their VR department. And obviously his mission has always been bringing Shakespeare to as large an audience as possible. And that's what they do in the park up in Boston every year. And this particular medium, which is still very much in its sort of very early stages, seemed like an exciting new way to scale his mission even further. And essentially what we did was he cut down Hamlet to about an hour. The version that we used ended up being about an hour. And we rehearsed for 5 days, which obviously for film and TV is a luxury, and for theatre is abhorrent and terrifying. And then we shot for 5 days, and essentially the idea, the premise is that you will take the place of Hamlet's father's ghost. You are in his ethereal shoes, and you get to watch the action, the abridged action of the play out around you. So we were dealing with this new piece of kit, the VR 360 camera, which essentially was, in rehearsal, Steve would just stand where the camera was going to be, because that was the best way of getting an idea as a director of what the show would actually look and feel like. And then on the day, we had to perform around this bizarre UFO looking on a tripod style thing, and create a kind of mini version of this world. He is very much focused on the father-son relationship and trying to put the audience member into the world of the play in a way that tries to combine the best of theatre in the round, if you think of it in that way, and film.
It's a fascinating undertaking, but I want to back up a little bit, because you mentioned that your rehearsal period was only 5 days. That seems pretty daunting.
It was, it was. I'm not going to lie. It was a little. I mean, Steve and I had been talking about it for a couple of months prior to rehearsal, so obviously, in my particular position, I had to show up off book, otherwise it would have been a train wreck. And I think the biggest challenge is, having done Hamlet once before, was actually remembering the cuts more than the lines, and really trying to reshape it for the world that he and Clint Ramos, who is a production designer, had created.
How did you prepare on your own before the before the rehearsal process began?
Steve was incredibly generous with his time, and we had a bunch of Skype conversations. We talked stuff through. I came into it reasonably well armed, having done it in college and having been one of my favorite, if not my favorite plays. So I've put in the hours of thinking about it prior to this project, and what we got to do, again over Skype from New York to LA, was just talk through how his vision was going to work and how I could align my own interpretation of the play with his.
And you've done quite a bit of feature film as well as television. A 5-day shooting schedule for 60 plus minutes of material. How did you manage that? It's
very unusual, the medium itself. So essentially, as you see if you watch it, each take, if you will, each scene can be as much as 6, 7, 8, even longer minutes long, which is obviously unheard of for the most part in film or television. And there's no going in for coverage. There's no, oh, I messed up that line, let's go back and take that one again, because we have to go all the way through. And not only is there no opportunity for pickups or, multiple takes, there's no strolling off camera. There's no, because the audience has a 360-degree perspective, you can't just slip behind the camera and get off screen. And you also can't really control where your audience member is looking. So we had to all be on the same page throughout and really keep the ball in the air for each take. And as soon as there was a screw up, we had to start again. And it's an awful lot of setup because, again, any crew member could not be visible. They couldn't hide behind camera. They had to go and hide behind a wall somewhere. And a lot of the cast were visible for a lot of the show, if not in the action. Then, if when you got your goggles on, you turn around and look in the other direction, you might see Brooke Adams on the bed with her own blocking and everything going on, in the background, if you will. So the biggest challenge was really keeping everybody on the same page and in the same world for these long takes, because we physically didn't have enough time to do very many takes, and there's no stopping and starting. So
it sounds like it combined maybe the most fatiguing and stress-inducing aspects of both film and live performance.
That's certainly how it felt on the day.
But now that you've had a chance to see the finished product, how does it compare with what you had envisioned?
I love it. I think it's very impressive. I think it's a crazy new medium, and it'll be very exciting to see what people can do with it going forward. I think, at the time of shooting anyway, this was the longest live action VR project, and not to mention using a classical text. So we were very much at the forefront of trying to figure out how this medium is going to work. So it was really everyone kind of figuring it out on the job. And looking back, I'm kind of my own worst critic, so I think that there are a few things I would have done differently, only because the medium itself is so unusual. So, for example, if you are 3 to 4 feet, say 3 to 4 feet from the camera, the quality of the focus of the camera is such that it's very similar to being in a close-up on a TV show or a film. So the level of detail in your face, how small the performance can be, correlates pretty closely to cinema. However, if you are more than 4 feet away from the camera, it's a bit more like you're up on stage in a Broadway theater, with regards to how much more you have to be in your body, how much bigger the performance has to be for things to be communicated clearly to the audience member, which on the day you just don't know. And you also, it's hard to keep track of how close you are to the camera in certain moments and to manipulate your performance accordingly. But it was hugely educational to look back and be like, oh, okay, I see how it works now. I want to take another go.
so having done it once, you're ready to do it again for the Scottish play.
Yeah, I think that I think the opportunity there is so exciting because you, as you say, you really get to immerse the audience member fully in the play or the piece.
Do you have the sense that you're on the vanguard of something new, or that this was an interesting project that will not be replicated?
I really hope that it is replicated. I think that as the technology improves, we were talking about it with the Sensorium guys, who were the guys behind the VR magic, and they're saying that the quality of the file of the footage is so high that it's too high for the tech that we have to go with it. So, for example, everything is in 4K or HD or whatever, right, in these cameras. Now, normally we're used to watching that on our screen with one of those cameras in action at a given time. There were 16 or 17 of these cameras shooting at the same time. So if you imagine how big that file is going to be, you won't get high enough resolution watching it now. So it feels a little bit like we're not quite there. We're sort of, in a few years, you'll be able to watch this on your phone and it'll really feel like you are on set with us. So in that sense, it definitely felt like we were wading into a pool and nobody really knew how deep it was yet.
You've worked on projects of high-profile projects, certainly had a lot of resources behind them. But have you ever worked on anything with a producer with as deep pockets as Google?
That's a good question. I mean, I don't think that, I think Steve is really the guy who had this vision and who persuaded Google to give it a shot, because they are keen to make more projects like this, to develop this space, figure out how it's marketable, figure out if people are interested. It's still, as you say, very much the vanguard of this technology. So I think for them it was as much an experiment in the medium as it was a creative endeavor in its own right. So I think Steve very cleverly managed to make it so that we could align those two agendas very nicely, so that we all felt that we were doing something special.
And the production, as you say, is notable not only for the technological innovation which shapes the way that the viewer experiences the play, but also for its production design, for example, its brevity and its particular point of view. Can you speak to those other elements which make this production unique?
Yeah, absolutely. I won't ever forget the first time I saw the set, and it was so Clint Ramos, who was a very well known set designer, production designer. He did all the whole set, all the costumes, and we took over an abandoned vaudeville theater on Staten Island for the week, and essentially he filled it with this incredible set that is sort of the idea behind it, I believe, was that it's composed or comprised of a lot of clutter and confusion to it, but everything has a kind of a cohesive purpose. So the whole show takes place within this cavernous space, but it also feels very intimate because of the more sort of localized little mini sets within the sets. And I think that was a fantastic idea, because what it enabled us to do was to keep the audience with us in the world of the play without disorienting them too much. Because the thing about VR is, as soon as you change location, you have to recalibrate. It's not like with film and TV, where we're used to cutting to a different place and we can see where we're going on because we're literally being pointed at what we're supposed to be looking at. Mm-hmm. In this medium, you have to give your audience a little bit of time to reorient, because they don't have a point of reference. Like they don't know where they should be looking. So to have everything within one space helped, because if you do move the audience member, they can more quickly center themselves. Like, oh yes, I recognize that's the bath over there. Yep, that's where I was. Okay, now I know where I am. So it helped to make it less confusing, as well as, I think, visually quite stunning and engaging. And it meant that whatever direction you happen to be looking in, if you find what I'm doing particularly boring, you can look the other way and you'll see something interesting happening, across the room.
I imagine that's the sort of thing that audiences may become more accustomed to as they become more familiar with experiencing narrative drama in the VR realm.
I would hope so. I think that it's a fascinating element that we haven't had to. I mean, obviously, some more exciting theatrical productions, you get to do really cool stuff in the space of the theater, but this is unique insofar as the entire set, the entire world is the show. So there isn't any, there's no other audience member to get in your way, or you have Steve's sort of line was the thing about it is that you have the best seat in the house every show. The seat is curated and designed to be the best seat in the house, and you get to look wherever you want to look. And I think it's pretty cool, because I think of a lot of films where I'm like, oh, damn it, I wanted to stay in that room a little bit longer. I wanted to look in the other direction to see where that guy went. And the more that virtual reality and augmented reality are developed, I think the more opportunities there will be to do really exciting things like that. A little bit of a make your own adventure element might come in. There's they're really starting to play with storytelling and narratives and how we can all repurpose them and make them a bit more exciting for the modern age. Yeah.
Right. A play which admittedly is all about words, is now given this new life thanks to this fascinating new technological medium. I want to back up a little bit. So tell us about your journey as an actor with Shakespeare. You mentioned that you first encountered Hamlet as an actor in college. Was that your first exposure to Shakespeare?
In high school as well. I wasn't an actor in high school. I did some plays, and then I did a year at Lambda in London before college. So Shakespeare was really my way in to theatre and acting and this entire world, just because I was more of an English student than I was a performer. So I've always had a special place in my heart for it, because I've felt like it was that Shakespearean verse specifically was my conduit into this bizarre career that I find myself in.
That's fascinating. You say that Shakespeare was your entree into acting, but I think most people will know you for your non-Shakespearean roles.
Yeah, I suppose it's one of those things. I feel very lucky to have gotten to have the opportunity to do a bunch of different things already, and I'm incredibly grateful to Steve that we got to do this last year, because I was starting to get that itch to do a play or do some Shakespeare or something in that world, and he managed to fit it into 10 days for me, so that's pretty cool.
So the speech that you've chosen to share with us today is from Hamlet, and it's from Act 1, Scene 2. It's quite a well-known speech, but for those of us who might not be so familiar with it, what is this speech about, and where does it take place?
Obviously, it's very, very early on. It's one of our early introductions to the character of Hamlet and his dilemma. And I think if it were a modern TV show or film, this would be the clumsy exposition scene where we have the character lay everything out for us as clearly as possible. And it has a special place for me, because this was the first Shakespeare monologue or soliloquy that I ever learned, and it was for a declaration competition in high school, but also mainly amusing because I skipped half of it while doing it, and in the final round of this competition, I managed to jump up, I think, 5 or 6 lines, and the judge didn't realize, which was great, and I ended up winning it, despite the fact that I hadn't actually recited a fair chunk of it. So I thought it would only be fitting to do that chunk, and so I can prove that I do actually know it.
That's great. I love this speech, because if you didn't know the name of the play and were just suddenly sitting there watching it, you'd be forgiven for thinking maybe that Hamlet is a secondary character until this moment when he speaks and he has the stage all to himself. So who's he talking to?
Well, I suppose that depends on your interpretation a little bit. Given that it is a soliloquy, he is alone on stage, and he is, one might say, thinking out loud, or if you're of a more religious persuasion, he is really addressing God. He does in the text address God directly. My feeling, only because that's where I come from and how I function myself, is that this is more of a trying to get his thoughts in order, trying to really lay it out for himself, so that the confusion and emotion and tumult of the last few months are clarified in his own mind a little bit, so that he really knows why he's so upset and what he's thinking and feeling and what he's going to do going forward. Not that he reaches any kind of coherent conclusion, but I think that was...
In Hamlet 360, is it treated as a direct address to the camera or to the audience? Actually,
in 360, Horatio is on stage, or he's in the scene with Hamlet. So there's an element of throughout Hamlet 360, there is an element of Horatio playing the role of what might be more conventionally staged as Hamlet in soliloquy or talking to himself, he is addressing this to Horatio.
Oh, well, that puts a different spin on things, doesn't it? As an actor, I would think that would be pretty helpful.
I really liked it. We didn't do the whole soliloquy. It was a heavily abridged version of it, but I did like that version because it is more dynamic, obviously, as we know, to have somebody else to play off, to persuade and to inform, rather than to stand up pontificating on stage. So I like that version of it a lot.
Well, we'd love to hear it if you care to share it with us. This is Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 2.
Oh, that this too solid flesh would melt, thaw, and resolve itself into a dew. Or that the everlasting had not fixed his cannon 'gainst self-slaughter. Oh, God, how weary, stale, flat, and unprofitable seem to me all the uses of this world. Fie, aunt, fie, 'tis an unweeded garden that grows to seed. Things rank and gross in nature possess it merely. That it should come to this. But 2 months dead. Nay, not so much, not 2. So excellent a king, that was to this Hyperion to a satyr, so loving to my mother, that he might not between the winds of heaven visit her face too roughly. Heaven and earth, must I remember? Why, she would hang on him, as if increase of appetite had grown by what it fed on, and yet within a month, let me not think on't. Frailty, thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old with which she followed my poor father's body like Niobe, old tears, why even she, oh God, a beast that once discourse of reason would have mourned longer, married with my uncle, my father's brother, but no more like my father than I to Hercules, within a month. Yet the salt of most unrighteous tears had left a flushing in her galled eyes. She married, oh, most wicked speed to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. It is not, no, it cannot come to good. But break my heart, for I must hold my tongue.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is fun, isn't it?
It is. It's a lot of fun.
What a treat to be able to do that. I really enjoyed your interpretation of it. And in this podcast, we like to dig into some nerdy stuff, so if you'll indulge me here.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's all about the text with Shakespeare. What are some of the things that you find in this text that are particularly fun to dig your teeth into as an actor?
Yeah, I mean, I love this because the way in which Shakespeare plays with the verse in this particular soliloquy, it has always struck me as being very, very true to how we think and feel and how we respond to emotions in real time. He's trying to process, he's trying to rationalize, he's trying to think his way through stuff, but stuff keeps popping into his head. It keeps interrupting his thought processes and sending him, it's all within the theme of what's happening in his brain, but he keeps getting hit by, specifically, obsession with how quickly this has happened. And, a little month, within a month, 2 months, how much it is. And it's all a bit confused and confusing. And he, being Shakespeare, I think replicates that confusion and that chaos.
I love that idea, the idea of using the verse as a launching pad or as a trampoline rather than being shackled to it.
It is, especially in this one. If you looking at the text itself, you'll see that there are so many sentence endings within a line, which is, it makes the verse jolty and feel like he's off kilter. Something is really not right, and his breath isn't coming right. Everything is not flowing in the way that a lot of Shakespearean verse will flow, and I think that's that's really evocative of how he's feeling.
Many actors approach those midline endings differently. When you see a midline ending, particularly in this speech, what does it do for you in terms of your technique and your instincts and your training?
Yeah, I mean, I've had this conversation a lot. I don't think we should be scared of them. I don't think that, my personal opinion is, I don't think Shakespeare would have been as obsessive about the scansion as some schools of thought would have him be. I think that it's a wonderful, beautiful rhythm to build the world in, and when he plays against it, he does so intentionally. The natural cadence of our pentameter is such that our ears tune into it. We can follow it, even when the words might not be familiar to an audience. We can follow the meaning so effectively because of the rhythm and the cadence. And when he's doing stuff like this, when the ending's in the middle of the line, he's screwing around with the cadence and the flow. I think we should pay attention to that. I think that we should use it. And it doesn't mean that you take a big breath in the middle of the line necessarily, but it does mean that it's a change in direction, or it means it's a change in thought, or it means that he wants you to engage with the idea that there are multiple different thoughts happening at the same time. We don't all think in a linear fashion. It's not always that we think our way through one problem and then address the next. And that's definitely true for Hamlet. A big part of this entire play is that he's trying to grapple with like existential crises of multiple types.
One thing that I love about this speech is that it's so accessible. The language is really available to all audiences. You don't have to be a scholar to understand what's going on and what's being said. There may be a few instances where there are some references to mythological figures which may be obscure to some, like Hyperion and Niobe. Of course, we're all familiar with Hercules, and some of the language may be a little archaic, like between the winds or galled eyes, or to post with such dexterity to incestuous sheets. But the thing that's great about this speech is that that's all secondary. We don't seem to get hung up on that because we're so invested in Hamlet as a person and what he's going through and trying to communicate and desperately struggling to assimilate. Is this your favorite of the speeches that you encounter in the play?
I think possibly. I did try to fight for a bit more of it to be included in Hamlet 360, and Steve was very generous and said that I could have a bit more, because it helps to really clarify, as you say, where he is, what his emotional status is, and where, as you say, like, get an idea of where he might be going from here. And I think that's why, as I said earlier, this is where the clumsy exposition scene would be in a TV show. I think of this all the time when writing, because if you can make if you can make the backstory and the exposition this engaging and this entertaining and this dynamic, then you've won. As a writer, this is sort of the pinnacle of how to do that. As you say, there are references in here that are beautiful and heightened, and the language is poetic. But he also, he says, married with my uncle, my father's brother. That just sort of really lays it out. But it's wrapped in this beautiful verse. So I'd say, yeah, I think maybe it is my favorite. I think, yeah.
The text that you shared seems to follow very closely the text from the first folio version, with a few minor exceptions, and I wonder if you wouldn't mind if we dialed in on some of these things. So in the text that we'll share on our website, this would be line 334, and it's right after the reference to Niobe, where it says, why she, even she, and then in the first folio it says, oh heaven, and in the version that you shared, it's changed to "Oh God." Can you speak to that choice?
That's just the one that I've always known. So I suppose I wouldn't profess to know too much about the differences in the specificity between the text in that particular case. But I think that a lot of what it happened throughout this starting at the beginning, that there is an element of him addressing the everlasting. There's this element of him battling with the fact that suicide is, a mortal sin, and the easy way out is not, in theory, an option. And it's God's fault that is the case, because in Hamlet's perspective, it's a sort of a rational exit from this existential dilemma, this crisis that he's going through. He thinks that makes sense at this point. In a way, there's a logic to it, but the blockade to the logic is God, and that he's not allowed to pursue this course of action.
I think it's a little bit of a fascinating substitution here in this instance, because I think God does scan a lot better. Sometimes I've heard that the compositors would substitute, when you find something that scans clumsily and it's a reference to God or heaven, sometimes the compositors have made that substitution in order to avoid using the word God in the text. But here
Really?
in this text, there are other instances where the word God appears. So I'm curious. I'm curious in a very, very nerdy way about why it's heaven in this instance when it goes against the scansion. But that's neither here nor there. Maybe one of our listeners can chime in on that point. It's a wonderful speech, and this is a very exciting project that you're engaged in. For our listeners who are interested in finding out more and viewing Hamlet 360, Thy Father's Spirit, what's their way in? How can they locate it?
So the video itself, I think, is available on YouTube through Boston Globe's or WGBH platform. Yeah, it obviously it's designed to watch with a sort of a VR headset, but you can get those very cheaply now, and put your smartphone into it, and it sort of figures it all out with an app. That this is all not my area of expertise, but I can definitely find.
We'll be happy to post that link on the website. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Jack Cutmore-Scott is the British actor who is starring in Hamlet 360, Thy Father's Spirit, which is available for free on YouTube. So check that out with your virtual reality headset. The link, of course, is available on our website, and we invite you to come and check it out. Thank you for listening to The State of Shakespeare. I'm Garrett Vandermeer. Good day.